This is the Media Police Post from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this show, we police the state of truth in the Republic. And because truth is communicated to us by journalists and analysts, we have made it our civic duty to put it to the test. We advance from two confirmed truths about the media. One, and in the words of Roger Stone, the media is either lazy or evil, and for the most part, it is both evil and lazy. That is why the truth, their truth, must be put to a test. Two, another confirmed truth is that journalism is verified gossip. In fact, what is presented to us as news analysis is gossip that has been verified by journalists. This gossip has to be ground truthed. We will monitor columnists, we will assess the state of truth in what they submit to the Republic, and we will pass verdict on what is true and what is not. For the record, we are not journalists, we are thinkers. We are not lazy or evil, and we do not verify gossip. What we give you is the truth that sets you free. On today's show, we will discuss either our favorite columns of last week or columns which reflect unformed and uninformed opinions and columns that made you stupid. These are columns that fell into the cognitive trap of we see things as we are, not as they are, or that are based on conjecture history, and lastly, ones that smack of envelope journalism. Welcome, guys. What will we be looking at today?
Thank you.
Something. Last week in the media, there were quite a few stories about the president reopening of the newly refurbished Kenya Meat Commission plant in Athi River. A few of the news stories which made the round suggested that the president did so despite a court ruling to the contrary. This is a misleading perspective, especially in light of a lot of the recent sensationalization about the militarization of the state. So let us begin with the facts of the court case. The court focused on three issues. Firstly, the petitioners who took the case to court agreed that the president had powers within the constitution to reorganize government for effective service delivery. What they were arguing, however, is that the act establishing the Meat Commission had to be revised first. They also argued that placing KMC under the management of the military would have the effect of commercializing the military. Finally, they argued that there was no public participation. The High Court, however, rejected and dismissed all the arguments except for one. The court only agreed that there should have been more public participation under Article 10. But crucially, it gave government 90 days to regularize the situation. The decision was in February. By April, steps had already been taken to ensure that there was proper public participation. Those are the facts. And as much as people can be entitled to their own opinion, they cannot be entitled to their own facts. But there's an even bigger conversation that simply must be had, because this whole conversation, as mentioned, is unfolded within the fear-mongering about the militarization of the state. Part of the problem is rooted in most of us being trapped in a traditional notion that our disciplined forces are simply fighting machines, and their realm of their competence only goes as far as their army boots and AK-47s. But to only see things in this way would suggest the demise of imagination. And we also see this lack of imagination in those opposing BBI. People who cannot imagine that we can have elections without cyclic violence, and that part of the problem is a lack of inclusiveness. A lack of imagination that fails to see how or why we should include Kenyans in the disciplined forces in nation building. A lack of imagination that can fail to appreciate that the Navy has some of the best engineers in the country who work on Navy vessels, and so it only makes sense that they would have the competence to revive MV Uhuru at the port of Kisumu at a fraction of the cost and in record time. This is a vessel that had stalled for 15 years, but which in its heyday used to rake in millions every week in regional trade, and which can once again contribute to regional trade, wealth creation, and increased employment opportunities. It is a lack of imagination that fails to appreciate that these are Kenyans who believe in the Kenyan project enough to join a highly disciplined national organization that might sometimes require that they put their lives on the line for love of country. You have in these men and women an ideal meeting of work ethic, industry, and patriotic ideology. Add to that the fact that they also have a broad set of professional skills. In fact, the 2019 Kenya Military Defense White Paper goes as far as to highlight the national economic development activities that the military can engage in. Some of these include construction of dams, construction of roads and bridges, and also medical services. In addition, they have mechanical engineers who work on air, land, and sea vessels. Furthermore, they have high-ranking officers who coordinate complex logistics and operations in sometimes difficult terrains. There's a lot we would like to say about the paradigm shift that we maybe need in how we view things as Kenyans. But for today, we will simply ask this. If these Army, Air Force, and Navy men and women are Kenyans, and they are Kenyans who are highly skilled and disciplined, and they are well-trained professionals, what is wrong with including these Kenyans in nation building?
Amen to that.
Nothing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Well, let me take you in a slightly different tangent. This week I watched an interview of Professor Makau Mutua on Elephant TV. Well, it's not really a TV, it's more like a broadcasted Zoom interview. Well, either way, I'd like to analyze this interview because it made me feel a little stupid because of the arguments by Professor Mutua, and they suffered from two related logical fallacies. The first is the post hoc fallacy. This is borrowed from a Latin phrase that says, and I will massacre this, but bear with me, post hoc ergo prompter hoc, which is translated into after this, therefore, because of this. So post hoc is a logical fallacy in which one event is said to be the cause of a later event simply because it occurred earlier. So Professor Mutua argues that judicial events will breed political reactions, and likewise, political actions will breed judicial reactions. So the judicial and executive arms of government in Kenya are not interreliant, but they are catalysts of chain reactions where each arm shows its might. So for Professor Mutua, the handshake was a political reaction to the contradictions of the Maraga nullification. So this led to the BBI task force and the push to change the constitution. This led the courts then to invalidate the BBI process, and a reaction will play out in 2022 when the political powder keg will light up and the country as we know it will cease to exist. So this argument, where the actions of one arm of government leads to a reaction by another, is a post hoc fallacy because correlation does not equal causation. You cannot narrow down the processes to one singular cause. In reality, politics and life are more complex than that. The second fallacy is actually a tricky one, and it's related to the first one because it's the slippery slope fallacy. And the slippery slope fallacy works by moving from a seemingly benign premise as a starting point and then working through a number of small steps to an improbable extreme. It suggests that unlikely and even ridiculous outcomes are likely when there's just not enough evidence to think so. So let me explain. Professor Mutua starts by arguing that Kibaki and Moi were credible heads of state. But President Kenyatta, whom he calls Mr. Kenyatta, is not a credible head of state. In fact, in Professor Mutua's words, Mr. Kenyatta lacks the ability to command the political stage and govern a country. Professor Mutua then asks this question: what would Mr. Kenyatta do if push came to shove and there was political violence because of a disputed election? He answers himself by saying, I am not even sure he can do anything. It's hard enough to prove one thing is happening or has happened. It's even harder to prove a whole series of events will happen. That's a claim about the future, and we generally don't know the future with that kind of certainty. But Professor Mutua has assumed an entire chain of future events without really proving their likelihood, and they are based on his false personal opinion of the president. Don't waste your time on this video. As we say, he has made up his mind. He will not be confused by the facts.
There was an analysis earlier in the year that called him out for his predictions of the future, and which statistically demonstrated that he did dismally. So maybe he should work on being a prophet of doom before making such projections anymore.
I agree with you.
So this Monday, I want to reflect on the upcoming Madaraka Day. Last year, His Excellency pondered on the state of the Kenyan dream. He told us that 2 years after the first Madaraka Day, our founding fathers adopted Sessional Paper number 10 of 1965. It envisioned a Kenya with an economy largely locally owned, whose industries were producing for regional markets, and in which technology was the light and heat of commerce. He reminded us that this dream was further emphasized by Jaramogi Oginga Odinga in his book, Not Yet Uhuru, that independence was not complete until the economy was in the hands of Africans. The president also reminded us that Mzee Jomo Kenyatta warned us in his book, Facing Mount Kenya, that we must not focus on only what has been done. Our focus should be on what remains to be done. And to this last point, he crucially pointed us towards Tom Mboya's main reflections on constitution making. Mboya cautioned the nation against constitutional rigidity. Mboya argued that the constitution cannot be useful to a country if it is an end in itself. A good constitution must be responsive to the aspirations of a nation and be a means to a greater end. And if the political architecture provided by a constitution cannot support the growth and progress of a nation, that constitution becomes a cancer to the body politic. This is why Section 2A was removed in 1991 in order to create a multi-party system. This section had outlived its historical purpose. Then, after the 2008 violence, the National Accord and Reconciliation Act was embedded into the Constitution to expand the executive arm of government. This happened out of necessity. And in 2010, we adopted a new constitution altogether, replacing the Independence Constitution. But the president told us last Madaraka that he discerned a new constitutional moment, one that will bring an end to the cycles of violence that Kenya experiences in every election since 1992, one that will lead to a much more inclusive society. So as we speak, BBI has seemingly stalled because some institutions seem more bothered with process over substance. But as we get closer to the next election, we as a people should reflect on what we want. We shouldn't waste this moment. We're being given a chance to right a wrong.
I completely agree with you. And yes, we are in a constitutional moment. The time has come for us to have a conversation with ourselves and see what we need to do about our politics.
There you go.
I also think it's an existential moment where we have to ask ourselves who we are and who we want to be as a nation.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us on the Media Police Post. Columnists, public, we're putting you on notice. Join us next week.